The sun leaned low over the Wyoming hills, spilling copper fire across the prairie grass. In that glow walked Eliza Hartwell, a girl the town of Dustwater never welcomed. She wasn't wild, not reckless, just alone. Her father had drunk himself into the grave, her mother followed from sickness, and the town folk muttered that Eliza carried some kind of curse. No man asked for her hand, no family drew her near. She kept to the edge of the settlement, stitching clothes for pennies, her eyes always lowered. But that evening, the quiet broke. The wind carried hoofbeats, steady as a heartbeat, from the far trail. A rider came into view, tall, broad-shouldered, dust-streaked, with eyes shadowed beneath the brim of a weather-worn hat. His name was Caleb Rourke, a rancher-turned-drifter, a man with scars both seen and unseen. The townsfolk whispered he was trouble. An ex-soldier, widowed young. They said his land burned, his heart broke, and he carried more ghosts than cattle. Yet when his gaze met Eliza's across the road, something stilled. He reined in his horse, and for the first time in years, someone looked at her not with suspicion, but with recognition. And Eliza, shy, shunned, and starved of tenderness, felt a warmth in her chest she'd long forgotten. A heat that made her cheeks flush in the dying light. The story of how she whispered, "You're my first," and how he vowed, "You'll be my last," began in that silence. The dust of Caleb's horse settled as he swung down, boots pressing into the dirt with a weight that seemed to echo. He didn't walk toward the saloon or the store like other men. No, his eyes had fixed on Eliza, standing with a basket of mended shirts outside the mercantile. "Miss," he said, his voice low, carrying the scrape of long roads and too many nights under cold stars. Eliza startled. Men rarely addressed her unless to scorn. She held the basket tighter, her fingers whitening around the handle. "Yes?" Caleb tipped his hat, not with charm, but with respect. The kind a soldier gives a grave. "You dropped this." From his roughened hand dangled a spool of thread, rolled loose from her basket without her knowing. Such a small thing. Yet no one in Dustwater had ever cared enough to notice, let alone stoop to return it. Her lips parted, trembling. She whispered, "Thank you." For the first time, he met her eyes full. Something passed between them, not bold, not sudden, but a recognition of two souls carrying burdens heavier than the world allowed. A pair of cowhands on the boardwalk muttered, laughing under their breath. "Poor fool don't know what she is." Caleb heard it. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Instead, he set the thread back into her basket gently, like it was worth more than gold. Eliza's cheeks warmed. She lowered her gaze, but not fast enough to hide the soft blush that betrayed her. That was how it began, not with a kiss, not with fire, but with a single act of kindness in a world that had long forgotten her. That evening, the town had mostly emptied into the saloon, laughter and fiddle scraping through thin walls. Eliza lingered near the well, her basket now lighter after trading her stitching for coins. Caleb was there too, filling a tin cup with water for his horse. For a moment, silence stretched wide between them, broken only by the creak of rope and the splash of water. Then Eliza's voice, soft, hesitant, slipped into the space. "You're not from here." Caleb glanced at her, his face unreadable in the lantern glow. "No. Just passing through." Something in her chest sank. She shouldn't have cared. But she did. She traced her finger along the worn rim of her basket. "Best you keep passing. Dustwater, it doesn't take kindly to strangers. Or, to some of its own." The weight of those words surprised even her. She'd never spoken them aloud. Caleb studied her a long while. The lines of his face were carved from war, from weather, from loss. He set down his cup. In the dim light, she noticed a pale scar running across the back of his hand, jagged as lightning. "World's got a way of marking folk," he said quietly. "Sometimes with scars, sometimes with whispers." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that, like they knew. Like they'd felt the same exile. For the first time in years, Eliza dared to meet a man's eyes and not look away. And when she did, the words trembled out before she could stop them. You're the first to see me. Her face burned red the moment it escaped. She lowered her gaze, ashamed of her own honesty. Caleb's rough voice softened, almost a vow beneath his breath. Then maybe I'll be the last to look away. 2 days later, Eliza carried a sack of flour down the main street. The wind bit sharp, curling dust into her hair. She kept her eyes down, hoping to pass quick, but fate never showed mercy in Dustwater. 3 ranch hands lounged outside the saloon, half drunk, half cruel. Well, if it ain't the witch of Dustwater, one slurred, spitting tobacco into the dirt. Careful, boys, another jeered. Don't get too close. Might curse your cattle. Eliza's step faltered. The flour sack slipped against her hip. She kept walking, heart pounding like a caged bird. Then a boot struck out, catching her ankle. She stumbled, falling hard to the dust. The sack tore, white powder spilling like snow across the street. Laughter roared. Her hands shook as she tried to gather the flour back into the torn sack. Her cheeks burned, not from the fall, but from the dozens of eyes watching, none stepping in. And then, silence. The laughter choked off. Caleb Rourke stood there. He hadn't said a word, hadn't even drawn his revolver. But the way he looked at those men, cold, steady, unflinching, was enough to turn their grins to ash. One of them tried to laugh it off. Just funning, stranger. Caleb's hand rested near his holster, but he never moved for it. Pick up that sack, he said, voice flat as iron. The man hesitated, then bent low, gathering the torn sack with clumsy hands. Caleb took it from him, shook the dust from the cloth, and handed it back to Eliza. Walk on, he told the men. And they did. Fast. Eliza rose, trembling, clutching the ruined sack. Caleb bent, brushing flour from her sleeve with a tenderness that startled her more than the fall. His touch lingered only a second, but it was enough. Her lips parted, and in a whisper so faint only he could hear, "You're my first protector." Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked away, but his words came low, like an oath he couldn't stop himself from making. "Then I'll be your last." That night, the wind howled over the plains, rattling shutters and scattering dust across the empty streets. Eliza's cabin sat at the far edge of town, small and lonely, its walls worn thin by years of neglect. She lit a lamp, shielding the flame from the draft. That's when a knock came, firm, steady, not the drunken pounding she'd come to dread. She opened the door. Caleb stood there, hat in hand, his broad shoulders shadowing the frame. He held out a small sack, flour, fresh from the store. "You dropped yours," he said. "Figured you shouldn't go without." Her throat tightened. No one had ever replaced what the town stole from her. She took the sack slowly, fingers brushing his calloused hand. The touch sent a warmth through her that startled her more than the gesture itself. "Come in," she whispered before her courage failed. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The cabin was bare, a table, 2 chairs, a bed pushed against the wall. She apologized for the emptiness, but Caleb only shook his head. "Seen worse," he murmured, lowering himself into the chair with the weariness of a man who carried a lifetime on his back. The fire in the hearth caught, throwing soft light across his face. For the first time, Eliza studied him close. The scar along his jaw, the lines around his eyes, the way his hands that had surely held rifles, ropes, and reins, rested open and still now, as if grateful for the quiet. "You fought in the war," she said gently. His eyes flickered, not with pride but with memory. "Fought. Lost? Buried more than I care to name." Eliza lowered her gaze. "I've buried too." The silence between them was not empty, it was full, layered, heavy with unspoken truths. In that space, her fear loosened, just a little. She dared to look at him again, her cheeks coloring in the firelight. He met her eyes, steady, unflinching. And though neither reached for the other, something passed between them, something fragile as thread, yet strong enough to hold. Sunday came with the clang of the chapel bell, its echo rolling across Dustwater. Eliza rarely went, too many eyes, too many whispers, but this time she braved it. She wore her mother's faded blue dress, the hem mended so many times it looked like patchwork. Still, she held her head high as she stepped into the aisle. The pews went hushed. The preacher's voice faltered. And then, as if on cue, the smirks began. A woman in lace leaned to her neighbor. "Shame she don't know her place." A boy snickered, tugging at his mother's sleeve. "Ma, why's the cursed one here?" Eliza's cheeks burned. She fixed her gaze on the wooden floorboards, praying the hymn would drown the whispers. But fate wasn't merciful. At the closing prayer, one of the ranch hands, the same who had tripped her days before, stepped forward with a cruel grin. He carried a length of rope, coiled and rough, like a noose. He drawled, loud enough for all to hear. "Thought you might need this. Seeing as you rope in trouble wherever you go." Laughter cracked like gunfire through the chapel. The rope dropped at her feet. Her chest tightened, humiliation scorching her deeper than any flame. She wanted to vanish, to turn to smoke and be gone. Then a shadow moved. Caleb Rourke. He rose from the back pew, slow and steady. His boots struck the wood with a rhythm that silenced the laughter one by one. He stopped beside Eliza, bent down, and lifted the rope. But instead of returning it to the ranch hand, he set it gently on the pew beside him, as though it were no more than useless twine. His arm brushed against Eliza's, a silent promise in the crowded room. "Seems to me," he said, voice calm as thunder before a storm, "a man who mocks a woman ain't much of a man." The chapel was silent. No one laughed. Not anymore. Eliza's breath shook, but for the first time, she did not feel alone in her shame. That rope lay on Eliza's table for days. Coarse. Frayed. A reminder of every whisper, every sneer. She tried to throw it in the fire once, but her hand froze, too much of her shame bound itself into those twisted fibers. Caleb noticed it when he came by to split wood for her. He set the axe down, picked up the rope, and turned it in his hands. His thumb brushed along the fibers, quiet in thought. "Funny thing about rope," he finally said. "It can hang a man, or it can pull him out of a canyon." Eliza looked at him, puzzled. He tied a simple knot, steady and sure, then set it back on the table. "Ain't the rope that decides what it is. It's the hands that hold it." Her eyes stung. No one had ever spoken of her shame like that, like it could be changed. That night, as the wind rattled the cabin, Eliza sat with the rope in her lap. Her fingers traced the knot Caleb had made. She thought of the way he stood beside her in the chapel, the way he took her disgrace into his own hands without flinching. For the first time, she did not see a noose. She saw a bond. A lifeline. And though she would never dare say it aloud, her heart whispered, "This rope no longer belongs to them. It belongs to us." The sky broke open 3 nights later. A black storm rolled down from the mountains, bringing with it rain that struck like bullets. Eliza's cabin rattled in the wind, the roof groaning under the weight of water. She huddled near the hearth, clutching the rope Caleb had left knotted on her table. Through the roar of thunder, another sound cut sharp, hoofbeats. Then voices. Men's voices. She froze. The same ranch hands from the chapel, drunk and mean, pounding at her door. "Come on out," witch, one slurred. "Let's see if your new cowboy can save you now." The door shuddered under a boot. Eliza's breath hitched. She had nowhere to run. Then lightning split the sky, and in its flash, she saw Caleb outside, already there. Hat low, rifle in hand, rain streaming down his coat. He stepped from the shadows like a storm answering another storm. "Best ride home, boys," he called, voice carrying through wind and thunder. "Ain't wise to test me tonight." They laughed, but it was uneasy. One reached for his pistol, too slow. Caleb's shot cracked like thunder, splintering a fence post inches from the man's hand. The horses reared, the men cursed, and in moments they were gone, swallowed by the rain. When silence returned, Eliza pushed open the door. Caleb stood there, soaked through, his rifle lowered. Lightning flickered across his face, stern, unshaken, but his eyes softened when they found hers. "You're safe," he said simply. Her lip trembled. She wanted to speak, but all she could do was step forward. He didn't flinch when she pressed her forehead against his chest, rain and tears mingling between them. His arms, hesitant at first, came around her, steady as the earth. In that storm, with the rope still clutched in her hand, she knew he was not just her first protector. He was her last. Morning broke clear, the storm spent, the land rinsed raw and new. Eliza stepped outside barefoot, the grass heavy with rain. Caleb was there already, tending her fence where the wind had torn it down. His shirt clung damp to his back, every movement measured, uncomplaining. She held the rope in her hands, the same rope that had once been dropped at her feet in shame. Only now, her fingers did not tremble when they touched it. She walked to Caleb, the knot he'd tied still tight in its middle. "Help me," she said softly. He paused, wiping rain from his brow, then nodded. Together, they strung that rope across the broken fence line, knotting it firm between the posts. What had been a symbol of mockery now held strong against the morning wind, useful, steady, reclaimed. When they stepped back, Eliza's throat tightened. "They gave it to me to break me," she whispered. "But with you, it holds." Caleb's gaze lingered on her, his jaw working as if against words he'd sworn never to speak again. Then, quiet as prayer, "Then let it be ours." For a long moment, they stood side by side, hands brushing over the same rough fibers, neither pulling away. The town could keep its whispers, its cruel eyes. Here, before the open sky and the mended fence, Eliza felt something deeper than defiance. She felt belonging. And though her cheeks flushed hot with the admission, she whispered into the silence between them, "You're my first, and my only." Caleb turned to her then, his scar catching the light of morning, his eyes steady as stone. "Then I'll be your last." Word travels fast on a prairie wind. By the week's end, all of Dustwater knew the story, the storm, the guns, the rope that once mocked her now tied into her fence by Caleb's hands. The townsfolk didn't jeer that Sunday. They didn't welcome her either. But when Eliza walked through the street, basket in hand, Caleb at her side, the silence felt different. Not sharp, not cruel, just cautious. Waiting. At the edge of the boardwalk, a little girl tugged free of her mother's grip and ran to Eliza, pressing a wildflower into her palm. "Here, miss," she said, bright as dawn. The mother gasped, ready to pull her back, until Caleb's hand closed gently over Eliza's, folding it around the flower. The crowd saw. None spoke. But the silence cracked, just a little. That night, in the cabin lit only by firelight, Eliza sat with the flower in a cup of water, the rope coiled neatly by the door. Caleb leaned against the hearth, his eyes softened by the glow. Neither needed many words. Love in their world wasn't loud. It was in the way he'd split wood without asking, the way she'd mended his sleeve where rain had torn it, the way their hands brushed and lingered just a little longer each time. When she turned to him, cheeks warm from flame and feeling, her voice trembled. "You're my first." He crossed the room slow, every step deliberate, until he stood close enough for her to feel the heat of him. His hand, scarred but steady, touched hers. "And you'll be my last." The fire cracked. Outside, the prairie lay quiet. Inside, love was not a grand triumph, not a victory shouted from rooftops, it was survival, tenderness earned in a hard land. And if you listen close, when the wind moves through Dustwater's empty streets, you might still hear it asked like a campfire riddle, what keeps a heart alive in the desert? A kiss, a scar, or the memory of one hand that never let go?